You ready to share too? All right, setting up. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to State of the Election episode 2 with your host, Alex Reed. That's me. We got Tyler and Jules with us tonight going over the state of the Electoral College. So guys, let's jump right into it. Let me get my screen shared here real quick. So just so you guys know, we're using a different map than we did last time. Last time we used 270 to win. This time we're using, Tyler, what's it called?
YAPBES. YAPBES is YAPMS.com.
Thank you. I know that couldn't have been easy.
Yeah.
So we're going to do things a little bit differently this time than we did the last time. So the last episode, we took great care to go through the entire map and literally discuss everything state by state. This is going to be a slightly shorter episode, though, because as you can see right here, we've got the map pretty much almost filled in. Now, what we filled in so far are the solid blue and the solid red states. That means everything you see here that is gray on the screen is something that the team and I both feel is in play. So with that, let's get right into it. So the first state we're going to talk about today is Nevada. Now, Nevada is a state that the group in episode 1 called I think it was a lean Democrat state. Is that right, Tyler?
That was likely.
It was a likely Democrat. Okay. So in between now and then, the last episode we did was on September 8th. September 8th, 538 showed this state as a 79% chance of victory for former Vice President Joe Biden. It now shows as an 85% chance of victory, with the latest poll coming in from Fox News saying Biden had an 11-point lead in the state. That pretty much leads me to believe that Biden has extended his lead, and I don't think he's necessarily at risk of losing this state. But Tyler, you wanted to jump in on this one?
So there are a couple things. Biden has truly expanded his lead in places like Las Vegas and in Reno, but he's struggling with the Latino vote in that state, and it's going to kind of encompass the whole entire map about how Biden interacts with the Latinos, but for sure, Biden's going to have something's going to happen for him not to win Nevada for sure. Because I mean, right now with real clear politics, he's up on average about 5.5% or so. I mean, even Fox News had a poll a couple of weeks ago that had him up 11 points, which I think that's probably skewed a little too far. But even if he's up by half of that margin, it's going to be really hard for Trump to overcome that.
Yeah, I think so. Jules, do you have any thoughts on Nevada?
I mean, I think Nevada's always been, I mean, not always, but recently in the last several cycles, Nevada's been a pretty solid lock for Democrats. It's become more...
You say that, but Clinton only won it by 2.5 points.
Right. But Obama's won it pretty handily twice, and it's become overall more... minority and more left-leaning in general. There's a lot of people from California that have been moving to Nevada and Arizona and Colorado and Texas and New Mexico. And so Nevada has become much more decisively Democratic. Moving to Nevada and Arizona and Colorado.
Oh, did we lose sound here? Or can you guys still hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, so I think we might have lost Jules for a second there. We lost the last thing you said, but
just people from California have been moving a little further out east into Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas. So there's been a lot of liberal influence coming in from California, and I think we're gonna see Nevada trending more and more blue.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that characterization, and based on the last episode that we did there, we also characterized Nevada as a lean Democrat state. I'm almost willing to call it a likely Democrat at this point. What do you guys think?
I would say it's likely.
I would say so. Recent polls, as you said, Fox News poll, Biden's ahead by 11 points. I think that's pretty decisive.
Yeah.
There haven't been any polls recently in the last month and a half that have had Trump leading at all. And most polls are well over the margin of error that.
I mean, Rasmussen had him up by 1, and we all know how Rasmussen is. So that's kind of what I'm saying. It's probably half of that 11 realistically. So even if it's half of that at 5.5%, still
it's pretty solid.
Yep. Agreed. So I think we can all characterize Nevada that way. Perfect. Moving on. Arizona. Now this is, I believe, the first like true swing state that we're going to talk about tonight. Actually, it's a state that Trump carried by, I think, a pretty significant margin back in 2016. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but
3.5.
3.5. Okay, never mind. Not significant at all. So goes to show you why it's in play now. So
Romney won it by almost 10%.
Yeah.
12.
So in our last podcast, we actually had Arizona as a tilt Democrat state. How do you guys feel about it this time around?
I think we can move it up to lean at this point. I think Biden's been keeping a lead of 4 or 5 points on average. Here on 538, they have Biden with a 66% chance of winning out of 100. So I think it's becoming more and more clear that Arizona is primed to flip.
Yep.
I agree. Yep. Arizona's going to flip. It's becoming increasingly difficult for Trump to overcome what he's gotten. He's not really advertising TV-wise in the state. The RNC's basically folded over and gave up on Arizona, I think. Yeah. And he's leading by about 4 points on average. So,
right. Yeah, it's it's funny. Like, the Democrats haven't won Arizona probably. I think Bill Clinton was the last president that won Arizona. Is that correct?
In the 90s.
It's been quite a while. There was actually a recent poll out from Siena College in the New York Times that has Biden up by 8 points, which is wildly significant because it looks like the last 6 or 7 polls had him at the most up 6 points and at the least up by 1 point. So seeing a poll, especially an A+ rated pollster by 538, characterize Biden as having an 8-point advantage in Arizona is very significant. And for that reason, I'm willing to probably move Arizona up to likely from tilt. Are you guys on board with that?
I'm on board.
I am.
Cool. Let's do that. All right, moving on. New Mexico. This was another one of those states that we kind of similar to Nevada. We had pretty likely in the Democrats' corner. I'm curious what you guys have to say about that one.
I would say that Biden's lead has totally increased.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
He is leading in almost every poll by double digits. There has been a couple polls in the past couple months that have shown it a lot closer, but with the momentum of the debacle event that we had last week, Biden is definitely improving his stance in places like New Mexico.
I'm just wondering which debacle event, because there were several.
Oh, there has been several, but I'm talking about one event that happened last Tuesday.
Fair enough.
I want to take a real quick an audience question, and I want to direct this to whichever one of you wants to answer. Tom Rohr in the chat asked, what message is the Trump campaign using that is persuasive to the South and Midwest rural states? Do we want to take this question now, or do we want to hold off until we get to some of those states?
I would wait until we get to Ohio or Georgia.
Okay.
I will definitely take on that question. For sure.
Tom, thank you so much for your question. We will address it later in the podcast. So I think it's pretty safe to say, so we had New Mexico as a likely Democrat state. And I think it's pretty safe to say that we would characterize that as safe at this point. I think so too. So
I think the last several cycles have demonstrated New Mexico to be a pretty safe Democratic bastion at this point.
Yep.
You would think, but it has gotten closer than it has in the past, and there are other factors that could potentially make it different. But yeah, it's definitely gotten stronger for Biden over the last month.
Yep, I agree. Cool. Okay, New Mexico, we're calling safely blue. Let's move on to Colorado. How are you guys feeling about Colorado right now?
Jules?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good about Colorado, honestly. I think we're about to pick up a Senate seat in there. I think we're going to pretty handily win it. I think Colorado, I mean, right now on 538, Nate Silver has a 92% chance of Biden winning. We've got double-digit polling here. We've got +10, +16, +12, +10, +16, +10, +13. I don't think there's any chance of Colorado going back towards the red margin. It seems like it's been pretty safe, and it's I think it's pretty solid blue.
Yeah. Yeah, I would typically agree with that, especially you've got a very vulnerable senator in Cory Gardner right now. That is, I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but I think he's very, very much at risk of losing his election being a Trump supporter from a typically blue state. Tyler, do you have the numbers?
Hickenlooper is, he's up about 5 points on average. Mm-hmm. I mean, Hickenlooper is very popular in that state. If I remember correctly, he was a former governor. He will definitely win that spot. It's the same as in Arizona in that you have somebody who is basically losing the demographic battle.
Yeah.
And they're definitely going to lose that fight. I mean, obviously, Martha McSally was put into that spot after John McCain passed away. So she is at a disadvantage, just that right there. But Cory Gardner is definitely losing the demographics. That state is changed holistically in the last 6 years.
Yeah, it's definitely a completely different demographic of voters now in Colorado. I don't think we're going to see Colorado going red anymore. Probably for the near future. I can't see Colorado moving back towards the Republican side of things.
And just
before it was more of a toss-up than it will be this time.
Right.
I'd agree.
In a normal election year, I would say Colorado is more of a toss-up.
Yep. And just to give you guys a quick idea here, when we did our last State of the Election podcast back on the 8th, 538 gave Biden an 86% chance of victory. That number is now ballooned all the way up to 92%. With that in mind, I'm also willing to characterize Colorado as a safe state for the Democrats.
I would say safe.
Yeah.
Solidly safe.
Yep. Cool. Moving right along, this is going to be an interesting one, actually. Let's move on to Texas. This is in my lifetime. I will say that I never thought that I would see a day where Texas being in play for the Democrats wasn't just something to capture a news cycle. It is actually real. Texas is very much in play for the Democrats in this election cycle. And I want to go to Tyler to tell us how.
So realistically, let's put it this way. Romney in 2012 won Texas by 16 points. Trump won Texas by 9 points. Why are we talking about this being a battleground state? It shouldn't be. But Texas right now, a lot of polls have been coming in with Trump with the lead somewhere between 2 and 5 points. Quinnipiac had a poll a couple weeks ago at 5% win. UMass has him at 4. But if you look at the momentum that has been coming out, even in places in Texas and the Dallas suburbs, the Houston suburbs, especially Houston right now, especially with the fact that they just got hit by a hurricane with Beta. Not saying it was too bad with damage, but it was still damage. And you notice because of the news cycle and how the president likes to suck all the life and the air out of any kind of news cycle, nobody's talked about how Laura demolished most of the central Gulf states. Beta, you have Sally, all these nice large hurricanes that were pretty destructive around the Gulf Coast, and we have another one coming through Delta. So I mean, people in Texas are feeling disenfranchised because, or at least in the suburbs, they're feeling disenfranchised because they feel like they're not being heard. And even though the Democratic Party is fundamentally different than what they've gone with in the past, how most of those people have voted, they are at least normal, if that makes sense, compared to what we've been dealing with for the last 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I find it hard to see Texas going blue this year. I seriously doubt that that's going to happen. I think we're going to see some really close election going on. I think we're going to see Trump maybe winning it by a couple points, if that. It's going to be interesting because I think Texas will be purple maybe within the next cycle. It's hard to say, maybe the next cycle, maybe the one right after. I think, and we're going to talk about Georgia later on, I think Georgia is probably more likely to flip than Texas. But it's interesting because Texas is in play, and we've got Biden. I think he just announced that he's going to put a lot of money into a pretty aggressive ad campaign in Texas for this last month of campaigning. And I think that's interesting that he even thinks that that's worth doing. I mean, his war chest is pretty vast.
But see, so, Jules, you bring up a great point. Biden doesn't need Texas. He doesn't need Texas. Have to win Texas. He's putting money in there because he's gotten so much money just in the last week.
Yeah. His war chest is
after the event, the debate. I think his campaign fundraised somewhere around $150 million or something silly like that. If it wasn't him, it was the Democratic Party through Act Blue. That is a huge amount of money, especially coming into this last month. When Trump is retreating his ad spend, Biden's going on the offensive. When Trump should be going on the offensive with his campaign. I mean, if COVID wasn't around, he would be going on his message of the economy. He would be going on his message of the trade deals, anything like that. He's not able to go with those messages, and he's on the defensive in places like Texas. And as much as we like to think that Texas is going to go for a Democrat, we're at least talking about it. Jules brought it up. We're probably going to talk about it in the next election cycle. As we talked about it in the last election podcast, it might not even be the next one. It might be 2 cycles, but it's now becoming a reality that it can happen soon. And people are talking about like, well, MJ Hager can win her Senate seat as well. There's no polling in Texas that has her within 10 points, frankly, and that's not going to happen either. So as much as the pipe dream as we want Texas to be, it's not going to happen.
Not this year. But I think what we can do is perhaps affect down ballot for state assembly and Senate. And I think that's the most important part, that we could potentially take enough seats in the House and Senate of the state in order to affect redistricting and affect.
That's what I was going to say. And if we do redistricting based on the 2020 census, it's going to definitely change a lot of things for Texas in the next decade. And it's crazy to even think that could be a possibility, but it is a possibility. So Biden's doing the right thing. He's putting more money into Texas, being on the offensive, because it's going to help those down ballot races. and help us out in the future in Texas. It's starting the groundwork for those who run in 2024, 2028. But I would say Texas is likely a Republican state.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Yeah, I mean, based on what 538 is saying, back on the 8th, Trump had a 72% chance of victory, and on the 6th, which is where we are today, 71% chance. So the only reason I think it could be a possibility is because, typically we're at the point right now where Biden is expanding his lead in a lot of the states that he's pretty safe or likely in. And what you're seeing from Trump is a lot of those states tend to be kind of constricting a little bit. I feel like if Texas were really a safe Republican state, we would start to see the lead balloon, and we just haven't seen that yet. For example, the latest poll has Trump at +4 in a state that most Republicans win easily. It's not a good sign for Trump, in my opinion. But I tend to agree with you guys. I think Texas will probably likely go to Trump.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing in that usually by this point in the election, you would see the polls starting to condense. You start to see it getting closer. And we're seeing the opposite of that. I'm seeing the polls going shooting way more in favor of Biden, especially after the last couple of weeks, various fiascos, the smorgasbord of fiascos, we can call it. It's just incredible how self-destructive the Republican Party has become in this last couple weeks. Just they have not been able to get their shit together.
Yeah. So from our last episode on the 8th, we also had Texas as a likely Republican state. That does not change from our September 8th podcast. Who knows, though? You may see changes in the next few weeks. This election has been very, very fluid. So anything can happen.
It's been very fluid, but also very stable in terms of how the polls are. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah, we've seen a Biden bump. It's only been overall, but maybe a point and a half. But that's very significant.
Huge.
Yeah, no, exactly.
9% nationally. I mean, it's been stable. It's unlike 2016 where it was close, far, close, close, far, close. It was all over the place for 2016. This has been a consistent,
absolutely,
for Biden the whole entire time. It's just by how much of a lead.
Yeah.
Right. Let's move on. Let's go to Iowa next. Now, Iowa's interesting because first off, it went to Trump in 2016. I'm not entirely sure the margin off the top of my head. I'm sure Tyler's got that somewhere.
9.5.
9.5. There it is. Now, it's a state that on the 8th, when we did our last episode, Trump had a 68% chance of victory. Pretty good, right? That lead has now shrunk to 64%. And the latest poll coming out of Data for Progress has Trump with a 4-point lead, which is down from a 6-point lead, which he had at the beginning of September. So with that in mind, what are your guys' thoughts on Iowa?
So Iowa. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, if the trend continues, and in the scenario of a Biden landslide, I could see Iowa going. I think we've got some polling that shows Biden up a little bit. Actually, the Siena College New York Times from September 16th has Biden up by 3. Obviously, that was a couple weeks ago, but they are an A+ rated pollster. We have other ones, Seltzer & Co., also an A+ pollster from September 14th to 17th that shows dead heat. So I could see it being moving towards the toss-up range, and I think at this point it would probably go to Trump.
That was Des Moines?
Seltzer and Company
okay.
was the pollster I was referring to. I could see. I think if we held the election today, Trump might win by maybe 2 points. But it's close. And I think, that margin could narrow even further and possibly go towards Biden within the next couple weeks.
Gotcha. Go ahead, Tyler.
So for Iowa, so Trump did win Iowa by 9.5 points, but Obama won Iowa in 2008 and 2012. In 2012, he beat Romney by almost 6 points there. So it's kind of Iowa is one of those
elastic,
where it's very elastic. It goes by whatever wave is going, and this kind of goes back to Tom's question, in that Trump ran on him being somebody different. He wasn't a part of the political class. He would bring jobs back. He would bring manufacturing back. He would make the economy robust and stronger and better for the middle class and even lower classes, the farm class even. Trump over the last 4 years has done things that are opposite of that message, for sure. In the campaign promises that he can do now is that, hey, remember what things were like in January. Remember how strong your 401k was and strong the economy was. We can get back to that. But in places like Iowa, where his tariffs and his taxes on other countries, his trade wars with other countries have really harmed those economies specifically, and they haven't been unleashed with growth. This is one of those places that Trump's message kind of falls flat, and it just goes into personal tax and everything. And that's what he's using, because that drums up his base. And this is one of those places that he can do that. But getting back to the current election for 2020, Biden on Real Clear Politics is up by about 1.5 to half a point, depending on the polling that you were looking at. That's close, and we don't quite have the bump right now from the debates last week yet on Iowa, and I bet that number is even higher. And that's one of the reasons why the 538 numbers are shrinking, because they're looking at basically what the overall election is, the national data, and they're looking at it. Well, if the national data is like this, it's probably shrunk a little bit in Iowa. So I bet when we come and revisit this in the middle of the month, it's going to be more likely that this is a lean Democratic state.
I see that. I'm inclined to agree with that. I think for now, I mean, looking at the last map that we did, we had Iowa as a lean Republican state. I'm almost inclined to downgrade that to a tilt Republican at this point, just seeing the gains that Joe Biden seems to have made in that state. So,
yeah, I'd agree.
I would say it would be lean Democratic, just because of some of the polls and the margin of errors that have shown up.
I'm also fine leaving it as a toss-up state too.
Really, it could be a toss-up. It's only 6 electoral points, but still, yeah. I this is one of those states where it's going to be too close. And frankly, I would say if wherever Ohio goes, Iowa will go.
You think so? Oh, interesting. Okay. And we'll get to Ohio later, actually. That's going to be an interesting one. So, okay. So I think for now, are you guys comfortable leaving this as a toss-up state, or?
I think for now, I think we're going to see some changes. I think, as Tyler was saying, we don't really know the whole spread of what's going on in Iowa today. I think next week we could have a much better idea.
Okay. I'm okay with that. The next state, I think, is probably one that we're gonna probably all agree is a little bit safer than the last few we've talked about, and that's Minnesota. Let's jump right into that one. So Minnesota, Biden, according to 538, Biden currently has a 90% chance of victory. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, this was not a state that Trump won in 2016. This was a Democrat state.
This was the only state that he did not win in the blue wall.
In the blue wall. Yep. So, and I don't see that changing in 2020.
No.
Like I said, Biden has a 90% chance of victory according to 538. The latest polling coming out shows Biden with a 6-point lead, and 11-point lead, respectively, although that 11-point lead is from a D- pollster. So we can probably throw that out. The latest A+ rated pollster we have has Biden with a 16-point lead, and that's ABC News Washington Post. Take with that what you will, but they are an A-rated pollster. So
I would say the Washington Post ABC poll from the middle of last month is an outlier. It is way above what it is. I think the lead is closer to 8 or 9 points for sure.
Yeah, I'd say in between 6 and 9.
And RCP says it's about 9.5.
Okay.
Based on their average. This is where do we put it last month?
Last time around, we had it as a likely Democrat.
We had it likely.
I would probably, just based on
I'd
what
say
I
safe.
think, back in September 8th, it was a 77% chance of victory for Joe Biden.
90% now.
90% now. I'd call it safe too. So
I would say this is safe. It's totally safe now.
Yep,
it is.
And this is going to kind of lead into where everything goes. But I want to talk about Nebraska District 2.
Oh, we skipped that. I'm sorry. Let's go back to that. Go ahead, Tyler.
So with Nebraska 2, on 538, Biden's winning it by, I think, 71%, if I remember correctly. There's a lot of things that I remember, but that's one of the ones that I don't really remember too much about. But the polling there is showing that it's stronger than it has been for that district. And it's an important district because, well, I guess when we were running this last month, it was even more of an important district than it is now, because it was only 1 point, and we were literally talking about this being a very close election last time, and it could be swung either way very quickly. I would say this is becoming a very likely district, but it's not going to make or break the campaign just because he doesn't win Omaha.
What is it? So Nebraska's second is it's like 1 or 2 electoral votes, right? It's not that much.
Yeah,
it's like 1, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So Nebraska as a whole is 2, and then they have 3 congressional districts that do everything separate.
Based on what I'm seeing too, I'm not willing to call it safe by any means, although Biden does currently have a big lead. I'm willing to call it probably a lean Democrat or likely. Or
I'd say likely.
Yeah. Very good. Sorry, I missed that one. That was okay. I don't know how that happened, but
it's very small.
Exactly. Easy to miss. No offense to anyone who lives in Nebraska. Moving on. Wisconsin is another state in 2016 that Donald Trump did carry. It was part of Hillary's blue wall that didn't come to fruition. Currently, Biden has an 83% chance of victory, according to 538. That is up from what is it up from here? It's up from 77% back when we did the last podcast here. Last time around, we had it rated as a tilt Democrat state. What are your guys' thoughts this time around?
So, and I think we talked about this last time. 14% 2008 for Obama, 7% in 2012 for Obama, and then 0.7% for Trump.
Yep.
We just talked about Minnesota. Minnesota was Trump by 1.5%, and we have him up significantly, enough to make it safe for this year. It's that whole entire area is shifting blue back to where it was, where it's like a rubber band.
Yeah.
Trump had the message. It's coming back to where the Democrats were. I think this is going to be it's very likely that it's going to go to the Democrats.
Yeah, I would say Wisconsin's coming back, baby. I mean, it's not, they don't want, They don't like Trump. I mean, it seems pretty, writing on the wall that he didn't really keep his promises with the blue collar workers in Wisconsin and also Michigan, which we'll talk about. It just doesn't seem like they have any faith left in Donald Trump's ability to do the things he promised to do, which is why they gave him the vote by a marginal amount. I think, Wisconsin's back.
This is actually, so the last podcast when we had Robert, one of our panelists on here, he actually stated during the podcast, by the way, Robert, we missed you on this one. Sorry you couldn't make it, man. He actually stated that Wisconsin, he felt, was probably is going to be one of the closest among the Rust Belt states. I tend to agree with that, but I also think that almost every single Rust Belt state at this point, I feel at least, is out of reach for the Republican Party. So with that being said, I would classify Wisconsin as a likely Democrat.
I would say it's likely.
Yeah,
just because based on the polling, I mean, this one is going to be, as Robert said, I 100% agree with him on that. It will be the closest one of the three up there.
Yeah, but I would say even that closeness won't be all that close. I think it'd be, I think Biden will win it by 3 or 4.
Yeah. The only problem that we're going to have is the mail-in voting and the absentee voting stuff. Because if Biden has to win this state on election day.
Yeah.
He has to be ahead enough in election day to where there's no question.
Well, and so that's one other thing that I wanted to talk about actually is on election day, you're going to see most of this map being red, and that's because the mail-in ballots are going to be counted later on.
I'm not so sure about that, actually.
That's what I was going to say. Yes, if everything was the same as it was last month with Trump and the October surprise of getting COVID and so many people around him getting COVID, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing away, with the debate. Just these 3 things have happened in the last week and a half, 2 weeks. They've not necessarily fundamentally changed the race, but they have made the race
it's more potent.
It's more potent. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, just with the things I'm seeing, with the things I'm hearing, that this is not, it's not going to last for too much longer after election day. It might be over on election day. I mean, 538 has this you'll see this because we're already at 254 and we haven't gotten to some of the other states. 538 says that this is a 32% chance of being a landslide election, which is a triple digit win. And it's scarily going to look like that as of right now. And if it continues the way it's going, unless something monumentous changes, it's going to be a landslide, and we won't have to worry about it on election Wednesday, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I think that also, to a degree, I think Trump tipped his hand. He has not had a very good plot in terms of this is how I'm going to cheat the election. He literally said, this is how I'm going to cheat the election. So everybody's like, oh, okay, well, I'll just vote early then. That's fine.
Yeah.
Screw you. I mean, your whole scheme involves us not voting early. So we'll just vote early because you've already told us what your devious plot is. So I just don't, I think for one, he tipped his hand because his ego is so overinflated that he couldn't possibly not tip his hand. And for two, it was a crap plot. It's a crap evil plan, man. Like you don't you don't tell everybody your evil plan before you enact your evil plan. You get your guy like over the sharks with laser beams attached to their heads, and then you say your evil plan because it's already there. And then James Bond can save the day. But the thing is, he tipped his hand before it even started. So yeah, I'm defunding the post office in order to try and keep voters from having their ballots on time, and then I'm going to contest it. He literally said it, and now everybody's like, okay, then I turn in my votes early then. So it's just, I think everybody's game to his schemes. His schemes aren't very smart. They're not very good. I see people, I see overall, like the early voting is insane compared to any other year previous. And I have to imagine that a lot of those people are Democrat leading people who are saying, well, shit, I don't want Trump to try and steal the election because he's going to try and fuck over the post office. So
everybody is galvanized right now.
Yeah.
As polarized as we are, everybody's at least galvanized. And even the people in the middle are galvanized, and it's just a matter of who they go for.
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't see I don't see his plan working. Especially in a landslide, I don't see it working.
Understood. Real quick, I want to shout out a few people. Vladimir Vlasov, Charles McConnor, and Jake O'Donnell. Thank you so much for sharing the stream. We really appreciate it.
Love you guys.
Exactly, man. Love you guys. Moving right on to Michigan. This is another one that we characterized as tilt Democrat. Back on our last podcast there, you can see on our map here, we've got Michigan as tilt. Now, this is, I said last time that I felt like of the Rust Belt states that Michigan was probably the safest, and I don't think that's really changed since the last podcast we did. According to 538, Biden has a 90% chance of victory. That's up from 83% on September 8th. So he's currently gaining ground there. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts?
So, I mean, short answer, I agree. But I still don't. I still think Minnesota is the strongest out of all three of those Rust Belt states that we're talking about, the blue wall. And I think that Michigan's in the middle.
Yeah.
I would say Wisconsin would be more leaning toward the middle, I guess you could say, than Michigan, but they're both very likely for sure. I mean, just all the polling is not quite double digits, but it's pretty close for sure.
That's what I'm seeing too. The latest polling coming out of Ipsos, I think I pronounced that right, has Biden up by 8 points. It's a B- rated pollster. Public policy polling has him up by 6. And then Glenn Gariff Group has him up by 9 points. So clearly there aren't many, with the exception of Trafalgar Group, who has Trump at +1. Everything seems to say Biden got this one in the bag.
Trafalgar is totally right-leaning with their polling averages.
Right. I have heard that. How do we want to characterize Michigan then? Do we want to characterize likely? That's kind of what I was thinking too. So cool. All right. Next on the list.
Ready for a fun one.
Florida. All right. So Florida, according to 538, Florida is currently at 66% chance for Biden. Now that is, let's see where we were at so we were at 55% when we did this podcast last, and just in recent days it looks like it kind of remained steady for most of September, but in recent days it's ballooned all the way up to 66%. Courtesy of a new poll coming out of the University of North Florida, which has Biden with a 6-point lead. Now, this is also an A-rated pollster. So
remember how I was telling you about the debate bump? This is definitely a bump.
Yeah, this is the debate bump. It's I think it also has something to do with the millions of dollars that Bloomberg just injected into into advertising in Florida.
He wanted to put $100 million into Florida.
It's a lot of money. And also Biden has been increasing the amount of Spanish language advertising he's doing in Florida. He's really trying to get to the Latino vote. And the Latino vote is a little more unusual in Florida than it is especially on the West Coast, because on the West Coast, it's mostly Mexican immigrants and South American immigrants, whereas in Florida, the Cuban immigrants make up a large portion of the Latino electorate, and they tend to lean more conservative. They tend to lean towards a candidate who's going to be hard on Cuba because they left there for a reason. It's a horrible, oppressive government, and they see the left. They lived under a extremist left regime, so they're a little more hesitant to vote for the left. But you also have Puerto Ricans, and you also have South American and Mexican immigrants there as well. So you've got a weird split in the Latino vote. You got the Cubans banking towards Trump. You've got all the other Latinos banking towards Biden. So what to do? Well, I mean, it seems like Biden's doing a good job in terms of addressing the concerns of the Latino community in Florida. The polls have been breaking pretty well towards Biden, and just in the last couple days, we've seen a huge break towards Biden. And I think that has a lot to do with those ad campaigns, $100 million, and the vote and the debate.
So for me, the turning point was before the debate.
Really?
It was when Trump was all about sending money to Puerto Rico. 4 years late, 3 years late. But anyway, 3 years late, he's now wanting to send money to Puerto Rico for Maria. And it's like, so why weren't we sending the money before? Why were we arguing it over the last couple of years? It's because Florida got close. Florida was getting closer, and Trump wanted to win that Puerto Rican, that Dominican, that Virgin Island vote. The people who were displaced from those islands to come to the United States, and well, the Dominicans, if they're citizens now, but the Virgin Islanders and the Puerto Ricans, they're United States citizens. They can vote. They have very long-lasting memories. I was there in February, and you can still see so much scar damage from the hurricane from a couple years ago now, and any other damage that's happened since then. And there are still some places without power. There's still some places that are really short in food, and they're desperate people down there. When Trump showed his hand with that, since we're talking about showing hands, of why he was really trying to hold the money back, that definitely did sway a lot of people as like, okay, so you're only giving the money because you want my vote. Well, you're not getting my vote back. So I would say right now, as much as we would like to say something different, I would say it's a lean Democratic seat.
I would even, like, just based on the polling data and how it seems to have kind of ballooned in recent days, I just, from my perspective, I don't know if that's necessarily sustainable, the lead that he's currently got, at least.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at how this went last time around. Trump only won the state by like less than 2 points
but Obama only won it by less than a point as well. That margin is always the winning amount, except for in 2000, which we all know 2000 won. Right. So
nobody knows who won.
Nobody really knows.
Nobody.
Yeah. Who won?
Nobody really knows. But Florida is always within about a percentage point of whoever wins the state. And right now, I mean, the fact that Biden has multiple point leads right now is great, but if you look at the margin of error, it is still close to the margin of error. Like the New York Times poll at the beginning of the month, he showed him at a 5-point lead, but the margin of error is just over 4%. So that's a 1% win.
Right.
So I think it's always going to be close in Florida. Florida is always kind of a strange state.
It's going to be a strange state, but he's leading, and the momentum is showing that it's shifting. But again, as Alex said, is it sustainable?
Yeah,
it could be.
That's the thing. I'm not entirely sure that it is at this point. Because of that, I don't want to. I'm hesitant to put it as lean. I'd like to put it as tilt Democrat, cautiously optimistic, tilting Democrat at this point. I would say.
I think so.
Yeah.
But we're already at 270. We just added one state.
Hey, look at that.
270. So he doesn't need Florida right now.
Yep.
But if we want to make sure that there's no question, Florida needs to be on that list.
Yeah.
So lean or tilt. You said tilt.
Yeah.
Tilt. I'd say tilt.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Now we're into, the gravy territory. Now he's by the numbers so far, he's already won. So we're looking at gravy now.
Yeah. So let's move on with that said, let's move on to the next one. This is, I would say,
ultimate gravy.
The
tastiest of all gravy.
This, I would say, is actually probably, with the exception of North Carolina, one of the closest states right now, and it's Georgia.
Ohio.
Yeah.
Currently, Trump is projected with a 55% chance to win this state. Now that is down from 68% where it was when we did the last podcast. So Tyler, what's changed?
The Atlanta suburbs. The Atlanta suburbs is what's changed everything. That and Columbus, Savannah, all those areas where that are usually blue are becoming bluer, if that makes sense. And that's definitely galvanizing Biden for winning. I think this is still I'd say this is a leans Republican state. Even though the RCP average has Biden ahead by 0.5 point. There have been polls recently that have shown Biden in the lead by like 2 or 3 points, but with the margin of error advantages that Trump will potentially have, it's going to be so close. But I still think that Georgia's going to head toward the Republicans this time.
I would.
Yeah,
sorry.
I mean, no worries. I just have a quick thing. Just based on recent polling, so the two most recent polls to come out, Quinnipiac University, a B-rated pollster, has Biden with a 3-point lead, and Landmark Communications, another B-rated pollster, has him with a 2-point lead right now. Again, a lot can happen between now and then, but I think just in my opinion, based on the way that not only has Georgia voted in the past, but also the data that we're seeing now, I would probably characterize Georgia personally as a tilt Republican state at the moment. And I'll give it to you for the next point, Jules.
Oh, that's pretty much what I was going to say. I was going to say I think it's more tilt. Right now, we're seeing a trend towards Biden. You have to think, if you look at Georgia, you've got Atlanta, which is definitely a blue bastion in the state. And you've got a huge minority population in Georgia. Engaging them, getting those votes out, barring voter suppression.
You say, I don't mean to interrupt. You say that, but there's a very large minority population in Mississippi, and we're not
right. But Mississippi is quite a bit different demographically from Georgia.
I would say Mississippi has more minorities than Georgia.
More minorities, but a different zeitgeist, a different cultural thing going on. I think Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the union. It is also one of the reddest states in the union. It has huge amounts of voter suppression that it is engaged in. There's been a lot of stuff going on in Mississippi, and it's overall the population is lower in general. Mississippi doesn't have huge major cities like Atlanta, whereas Georgia definitely has a lot more of a cultural hub going on. I think Georgia is an interesting state because it is
like coastal elite when you talk like that, though.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's too funny.
Atlanta does have more people that are like in the movie industry.
Well, right. Okay. But I'm just saying the population, the overall population of the state of Georgia is greater than the population of the state of Mississippi.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
Mississippi also is generally it is the poorest state in the union.
And,
it is traditionally the poorest state in the union.
And the only reason why I say this, when you put it to demographics, is Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia and South Carolina all have very similar demographics.
They do.
Georgia's the
they
only
do. I'm not saying that the demographics make a difference. What I'm saying is Georgia is a state that has things going on, so it attracts a lot more people. So what you're getting is people coming in from say Louisiana, New Orleans, and North Florida, and the Carolinas and South Carolina, and you've got more people who want to go to Georgia, who are generally going to be a little more left leaning. So you've got a trend in Georgia that can move towards blue.
Okay.
So yes, because Georgia does have the film industry. So and New Orleans does too. So when I lived in New Orleans, there were a lot of people who decided they wanted to move to Atlanta. There were a lot of people from Florida, I knew, especially in North Florida, who decided they wanted to move to Atlanta. There's a lot of people, younger people who are more in the arts, more into culture, because Atlanta is a city where there is a lot more going on than, Mississippi at least. But not to diss on Mississippi, but Georgia does have a lot more going on. And I think that is I think that is leading to a degree to a more left-leaning population. And so Georgia right now, I'm seeing a trend of Georgia moving towards being a purple state. And I think those factors are part of why it's doing that. Because of the economy, because of the culture, because of the music scene, because of the film scene, because of various opportunities that are happening in Georgia that aren't happening in Alabama and Mississippi and South Carolina right now. People are going to Georgia, especially in that region.
Fair enough. I always wonder if Georgia is actually becoming more of a purple state, or if it's just the fact that Trump is a historically unpopular candidate in my eyes. But I guess we'll see. Election is only less than a month away at this point. So
I would say that Georgia's definitely moving more purple, because in a red shift during the 2016 election, it still was lower than the amount that Romney won the state by in 2012 by 3 points. And that was when all the rest of America shifted red. So Georgia is definitely going to be a battleground state from this point forward.
So what I'm going to say right now is that in a landslide scenario, Biden wins in a landslide. So that means he wins by double digits. So 10 points or more, right? I would say in a landslide scenario, I'd say it would be highly likely that Georgia could flip.
Fair enough. I think we need to move on at this point, but I'm willing to characterize Georgia at this point as a tilt Republican state.
That's what
I'm overruled on this.
Yep. And last time around we had it as a lean, so this is a small downgrade. So skip that. There we go. All right, next on the list, another hotly contested one, North Carolina. Go ahead, Tyler. What do you got for us?
So with North Carolina, being that I have a lot of ties to that state, I do know that it's definitely a state that is going to be a complete toss-up, in my opinion. I mean, right now, there have been a lot of polls coming out this past week by East Carolina University, ECU. ECU's poll this week says Biden's up by 4 points. I mean, Reuters had a poll that went from after the debate to today that has them tied. So I would say with the East Carolina poll, because they have double the weight, the double of the amount of pollsters, it would be more representative of what's going on. I think that Biden's going to win this by like 1 to 2%, which would, in my opinion, put this toward a tilt for sure.
That's kind of how I'm feeling as well. Last time we did our podcast on the 8th, Biden had a 52% chance of victory in this state. We've ballooned up to 58 according to 538. As Tyler said, we've got two recent polls that have Biden up by 4 and 3 points respectively. Based on that data, I would be willing to upgrade North Carolina from a true toss-up to a tilt Democrat state, and I'm curious what you guys think.
I'm with you. I'd like to. It's only just recently broken towards Biden, just within the last week and a half. So I'd like to see a little more data. I mean, right now, I would say still a toss-up. But if the trend continues, but the trend's only started, so we'll see if that continues. I would still say toss up.
Yeah, it looks like it ballooned in recent days. I mean, just on October 2nd, Biden had a 53% chance of victory. It's now up to 58. So
this is all talking about the debate bump that I'm talking about. That's kind of why it's really hard to see where everything's going to be, but everything's trending.
And it's interesting because people talk about the debate bump all the time. It just, to me at least, I watched that debate. I didn't see a clear winner personally. I saw somebody interrupting a lot, and then I saw Biden struggling to compose himself after being interrupted so often. So none of the candidates really separated themselves there, which is why the debate bump, in my opinion, doesn't make a ton of sense. At least in this case.
It doesn't until you say, hey, you have somebody that was throwing personal attacks pretty much the whole entire time.
Right.
You have one person that was looking at the camera and trying to say, hey, do you understand what's been going on? This is what he's been doing.
Yeah.
Not saying that he was giving any kind of substance to those things, but you have somebody that was trying to appeal to voters, and you have somebody that was throwing personal attacks at a particular person.
Right.
So,
with that said, I would say tilt Democrat. Tyler, do you agree?
Yep.
What about, and Jules, you said it was a toss-up, correct?
I still think it's toss-up. I think the trend is too new to actually make a determination on it. But if you want to say tilt Democrat, I would say the current trend looks that way, but we'll see what happens in the next few weeks.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, we'll move it to tilt for the time being.
Cool.
There we go. All right, you guys ready for another fun one? Ohio. Now this one, according to 538, just recently and barely swung in Biden's favor. Now, for a little bit of context here, back on September 8th, when our last podcast was, I know I've said this a lot, by the way, Trump was leading with a 57% chance of victory in that state. That has now swung all the way to Biden having a 51% chance of victory and winning Ohio, basically. The latest YouGov poll that came out just recently, B-rated pollster, has this race a dead heat. So my question to you guys is, what are your thoughts about Ohio?
I think that's probably about right.
It's a dead heat. It's going to be a dead heat. But you also have Trump not wanting to spend any money on TV ads. I mean, we all know Trump's campaign is out of money, or it's running out of money.
It's floundering. Yeah,
it's floundering right now. They talked a big game about how much money they've had. Obviously, that is coming out to be untrue. But they are spending a lot on internet ads, which you can get more targeted, and you don't have to spend as much money as you do with TV. But the fact that you're not running TV ads in Iowa, Ohio, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina at this point in the election is big, and it's showing in the numbers with Ohio, in the fact that Biden's moved that number for 538's average, and there are polls coming out right now showing Trump increasingly losing his lead that he had in Ohio.
And what's significant about this is that hold on one second. Sorry. What's significant about this whole thing is that Ohio has voted with the winner in the last, I believe, like 5 or 6 elections.
It's since 1960.
Since 1960. Wow. That is crazy. Go ahead, Jules. Do you have any thoughts about Ohio?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, we're talking about gravy again. I mean, Ohio doesn't need to vote with Biden in order to keep that thing going. I mean, just because they have doesn't mean they continue to will. And maybe Ohio will vote with Biden. Maybe they won't. I don't think Biden really needs to be concerned about Ohio particularly. Ohio's been leaning towards the Republican Party for a while. It's been moving more red in general. So it's always going to be close in Ohio. It might end up just being a bastion for the Republican Party. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. It's hard to say. But I think Ohio is losing its cred as being a significant state that needs to be won.
Right. I mean, based historically, I don't know that I totally agree with that, but yeah, I mean, we could see a situation down the road in the next couple of election cycles where more states that didn't weren't traditionally significant, like Arizona, like Georgia and stuff like that, become states that could possibly swing the election. You're right. Maybe Ohio later on down the road doesn't have much significance. We'll have to see how it goes, but.
States coming out of this sort of thing. I think we're talking about the electoral map is changing. The demographics are changing. And generationally, it's the case that the younger generations, the millennials and Gen Zers and below, right, are more liberal. They're more left wing. And time will tell if they will stay that way. But it seems to me that there is more political engagement in the younger people today than there have been.
Things that have shown that Gen Z might be 50-50 for sure. They might actually tilt more conservatively.
Oh, interesting.
Really?
So in this election, they're only going to be about 1.5% to 2% of the electorate. So don't.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, they're not significant until they turn like 35 anyway. Because the youth doesn't traditionally vote. So it's going to be 15 years until we actually know how they actually feel.
But I wouldn't depend on it for right now.
No, I don't depend on it either. But I think there are many statistics that are showing that the left wing of America is going to become, and already is to a large degree, a majority, but it's going to become a larger majority. America is going.
Yeah.
So we're keeping Ohio a toss-up?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, so we had it as tilt Republican back on the 8th, and as of right now, just with the new data that we've been getting from 538 and recent polling data, I'm willing to downgrade that to a true toss-up at this point.
Yeah.
I think we were kind of almost there on the 8th too. But as of right now, yeah, with what we're seeing, I think we got to keep Ohio a toss-up state.
You got to realize also that it flipped the week before the election on 538 from a lead for Trump to a lead for Obama, or not right. Obama, but Biden.
Right. All right. So we'll leave that as a toss-up for right now. Okay. Moving on, Pennsylvania, the last of the blue wall. Now this is a state that we feel is going to be pretty close coming up. Right now, Biden has an 82% chance of victory, according to 538, with that lead ballooning in recent days. Back on September 8th, the last time we did this, we were at 69%. We're now all the way up to an 82% chance of victory in Pennsylvania. So, Tyler, what's changed since then?
Monmouth came out with a poll of Biden up 11%. And then CNBC came out with a poll of 4%. Emerson had a poll of 5%. These are all significant polls that have come out since the debate. Actually, there's a lot of polls that have come out since.
I'm noticing that too. Yeah, Siena College, New York Times, Biden 7, Biden plus 7. Emerson College, Biden plus 3. YouGov, Biden plus 7. Monmouth, yeah, like you said, plus 10. Yeah, this is all significant, and these are recent too. A lot of the polling data that we've brought up for up to this point has been mostly polling data from mid to late September and stuff like that, because the reality is polls don't come out every day. But in these really close swing states and stuff like that, you see a lot of these pollsters with their focus more on these states and doing these polls more frequently, and that's why you're seeing more data. So
I would also say that the states that we have seen the polls come out from that got data in October have skewed heavily toward Biden. So the polls that have come out in October. So this is one of those opportunities that Biden has definitely won on. He's definitely campaigned very hard in that state. He's from the state. He should not lose this state. And if Pennsylvania goes blue, that means everything else west of Pennsylvania will go blue as well, except for Ohio. Ohio is the only one that's not.
It could be, but it's not a guarantee.
But Ohio is always right further right than Pennsylvania is. So that's one that Pennsylvania have to be like a 10-point win for Ohio to come along and play.
Right. Jules, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's broken pretty heavily in favor of Biden in Pennsylvania. I mean, I think he was always gonna win Pennsylvania. I think depending on the matter of closeness is really what we're talking about. I think now more than ever, if we were holding the election now, it would be a blowout. I think Pennsylvania would go pretty easily to Biden. I mean, I just don't see any evidence that there's really a push for Trump. I don't see the argument of the secret Trump voters being actually a thing. And I've actually read a few articles saying there might be more secret Biden voters than secret Trump voters, people who live in more rural areas and more red district areas who don't want to say they're voting for Biden but are because they don't like Trump. And so I think there's actually possibly a polling error more in the favor of Biden in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota that could actually be end up with a larger margin for Biden than we previously thought there would be.
See, for me, and I don't have a ton of data to back this up at all. I would think almost the opposite would be true, because I think in 2016, people would have been more embarrassed to say they were voting for Hillary.
I don't think so. No,
I don't think so either.
People were more embarrassed to say they were voting for Trump, but I'm not even sure that was actually as significant as a lot of the media made it out to be in the first place. But I actually think if you are a liberal or a liberal leaning individual in a rural or a very heavily Trump loving area, you are not going to put that sign out in your front yard that says Biden. You're just not going to do that. And you're not going to tell your friends you're voting for Biden because the division is so great now. And the Trump supporters are so emboldened that they're not hiding it. Trump supporters aren't hiding that they love Trump. Yeah.
And Democrats are cautiously going with Biden just because it's
right. But if you're if you're a Republican, but you really don't like Trump that much, so you're like, I'm going to vote for Biden because this guy seems not stable, or for whatever reason, you're not going to tell your friends that. So I actually think there might be a bigger push or a bigger polling error in favor of Biden than not. And I think Pennsylvania is probably one of those places where that may be true, which might be what 538 is accounting for. But all these polls, I mean, it's broken pretty wide open.
Well, and that's one other point that I wanted to make is a lot of these websites like RCP and 538, they have accounted for a lot of the errors that 2016 polling had, specifically the quote unquote silent voter, and a lot of these Trump voters that they weren't accounted for back in 2016. They're adjusting for that, and that's why when people come in and they say, you can't trust polls because look at what happened in 2016. You got to figure, a lot of these pollsters would be absolutely stupid not to adjust the way they model their polls to actually account for things like that specifically. I'll touch more on that a little bit later. But for now, I want to call Pennsylvania one way or the other. Personally, I'm calling it likely at this point. And I'm curious to see what you guys think.
I'd agree with that.
Likely.
Yeah. Let's do it. Likely. All right. We have, it looks like one more to go.
Just Maine.
Maine's interesting, man. I think actually I'm the most curious about Maine in general because the Maine's 2nd district has broken for Biden. Maine's 1st and 2nd district, I think, are now most likely going to go for Biden. Maine, let's see.
538 says it's 55% Trump. Polling says for the 2nd district, polling averages on RCP are about somewhere between 1.25% for Trump. So this is a total toss-up. This is one where it's 1 point. Neither candidate needs either point, frankly, because it's not going to be that close of an election. But still, this is icing on the cake, one way or the other.
This is again gravy. I mean,
this is tilt Republican in my opinion.
The 2nd district is, yes.
I'd say it's actually a toss-up. 2nd district is toss-up. I'd say Maine as a state and Maine 1st district. Definitely,
those are solid.
Likely Democrat. Yeah,
that's where all the population is too.
The reason that I'm willing to say tilt at this point is the latest poll out of their Critical Insights has Trump with an 8-point lead. I realize that might be a little bit of an outlier there. And then Quinnipiac had Biden at a +9 earlier in September. But again, the most recent polling coming out has Trump with an 8-point lead.
The Bangor Daily
you might call that an outlier, but 538 currently has Trump at a 55% chance of victory in the 2nd district. So I'm willing to call that
I'd call it a toss-up, man. I don't know.
Because I have Bangor Daily News with 234 people responding at an 8% lead for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not insignificant. I don't think it's that much, but it's leaning toward Trump. It did go toward Trump by 10% in 2016.
Yeah.
So even with a blue wave, it's not going to overcome a 10% lead, I would think. So I would say it's definitely tilting or leaning toward a Republican.
I'd say more tilt. I'd say more tilt. If we're gonna go with tilt or lean, I'd say tilt because I'm seeing a lot of numbers more towards Biden than not. And I mean, just a couple days ago, I saw it was Biden had that Maine 2nd. I mean, ultimately, it's irrelevant.
You have to,
but the Maine 2nd district is mostly rural too, so you have to keep that in mind.
Right. I'm not sure how you do this here. So if we want to go
the blue and then click where it says MEAL 2.
Okay, got it.
And the 1st district.
1st district. Okay. We're calling 1st district solid, right?
Solid, yeah, I think solid. Absolutely.
Yep.
There we go.
And the 2nd district with a tilt. So
because that's where Portland and Bangor are. I mean, that's where everybody lives for the most part. The rest of it's rural space.
So real quick before we end things, 2 quick things I want to go over real quick. So I'm going to move this over to the side just so we can put our old map here, just to kind of give an idea of where we've come from and what we've changed since then. So I think the major changes that I want to highlight, I think Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania definitely are more solid to the Democrats. I think I would characterize Florida and North Carolina now as tilt Democrat. You know, as of this moment, I don't see anything that wasn't already solidly Republican that has become more Republican over time.
No, nothing's become more Republican. We even took Iowa and Ohio off of the Republicans' side and made them both toss-ups. We moved Arizona more solid into the Democrats' column. I mean, we moved, like you said, North Carolina, Florida. I mean, nothing has gotten any more solid for sure for them.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, look at our numbers too. We've got 334 to 169. It's already a blowout.
That's a bigger win for Biden if the map is like this than it was for Trump beating Hillary.
Yeah. Right. Because I mean, and the other thing to realize, back on the 8th, we had the Democrats claiming 290 electoral votes. That number has ballooned up to 334, which is pretty much blowout territory at that point.
And this is without Ohio and Iowa.
Yeah, which is huge. So, one last thing, and then we're going to sign off for the night that I want to go over real quick. I've been hearing a lot of people talk about not feeling like they can trust the polls, specifically because of what happened back in 2016. So I'd like to address that real quick. At this point in the election, and I want to bring in 538 for this one, just to give you guys a graphic here. Currently, this is how the election looks. Biden has an 82% chance of victory, and not just in any state particularly. This is the election. Biden has an 82% chance of winning the election outright. Back in 2016, at this exact point, I actually went and looked it up. Hillary had a 71% chance of victory. That's number one. Number two, I've also heard from a lot of people that a lot of the polling data was incorrect back in 2016 when they predicted the Hillary victory. The one thing to keep in mind is that it wasn't the major pollsters that were calling the election for Hillary Clinton. It was most of the major TV networks that were calling it a 90% chance of victory, et cetera, et cetera. And another thing to realize, Hillary nationally only had a 3% lead.
And that was within the margin of error.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And currently I'm sorry, where is it? This is the popular vote right now has Biden with an 8-point lead nationally, as opposed to Hillary, who had a 2 to 3% lead. The major point that I wanted to underscore to everyone watching here tonight is this is not comparable. It's not. And, I'm not saying to everybody that we can take our foot off the gas necessarily and just say like, okay, we've got a huge lead, we can just give up on campaigning. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I don't want people drawing comparisons to an election that just aren't true. So I had to get that off my chest, guys. So.
I share the same pet peeve as you do, Alex, and we've talked about this. One thing I do want to say is that a lot of people want to believe that when they look at a poll, that's what's going to happen. When they look at Nate Silver and 538, Hillary has a 70-something% chance of winning. She's more likely to win than not, right? But that's exactly what that means. She's more likely to win than not. However, the possibility that the other thing will happen still exists. And the day before the election in 2016, Trump had a 28% chance of winning. It's not that he was wrong. It's that for this particular election, that ended up being the case. His 28% chance happened. And that's true with all percentages, with statistics in general. If you just because something is unlikely doesn't mean it won't happen. But the smaller that number comes, of course, it becomes less and less likely. So with that in mind, we should still say that a 17% chance that 538 has is still a chance. It's still something that could happen, and we should not be considering that, oh, it's over, Biden's going to win. No, 17% is still within the realm of possibility. Until that number is a 0, we still need to be fighting for that.
So according to the New York Times, they've done the numbers about how wrong the polls were in 2012 and how wrong they were in 2016. In 2012, they had a very strong Republican lean. So everything came out a lot bluer than the polls said. So then they went back and said, okay, we're going to go with that bluer tilt. And then we had a red shift in our election for 2016. So they were wrong by a couple percentage points here and there. At the current polling averages, according to the New York Times, if the polls are as wrong as they were in 2016 with all the states that Biden is currently ahead in, because they have, according to all the toss-ups that we went through, they have Biden ahead in every single one of them except for in Texas. The only ones that Biden will lose will be Maine 2nd District, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, Georgia, and Texas.
Which would still give Biden an electoral college victory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are all states that Biden does not need. They have Biden still winning Pennsylvania, still winning Wisconsin, very close on Wisconsin, but still winning Wisconsin, still winning Michigan, still winning New Hampshire, Minnesota, all in Nevada is even a bigger win. So he still has them winning all those states. And then he also have, not he, but New York Times also has him winning Florida, very close, but still a win. So everybody's, as you said earlier in the podcast, everybody's taken their models and skewed them more to the right this time because of what happened last time with those voters that supposedly didn't come in. Obviously, the polling did say in the weeks leading up to the election, the 2 weeks after the Comey letter, that the election was going to be close. Everybody kind of ignored those numbers and said Hillary's still ahead. It's still going to be a Hillary win. Everything came down to the margin of error. And the popular vote actually was exact, according to 538. It was exactly correct. But
interesting. I didn't know.
But Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania all fell within the margin of error, and they all swung toward Trump, and that's what allowed him to win.
Yep. Great point. Yeah, I actually didn't know that about the point you made about if the polls were wrong, that he would still win those particular states. That's really interesting. All right. I think we've touched on everything that we want to go over tonight. So I think we're ready to call it right there. Folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been fun going over this with you. We'll actually, later on today, we will post the electoral map as we currently see it to our page. Make sure, for those of you who watched tonight and really enjoyed, please like and subscribe and share our content. It helps us out tremendously. And we'll go ahead and end it there. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you,
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.